Hi, I am the Drunken Bibliophile. I'm going to be reviewing a book today, The Lost Boys by Orson Scott Card. I had not heard of this book until I saw it at a thrift shop. Decided to pick it up because I really enjoyed Ender's Game by the same author. This book was written in 1992, so it was a little after Ender's Game. And that's it. I'm going to give you a full synopsis of the book, so spoiler alerts coming up, and then I'm going to give you my opinion on it, kind of what I took from it. This story takes place in 1983. The Fletcher family is moving to Steuben, North Carolina. Stepp is the patriarch, and he's been living off the royalties from an Atari game that he programmed, because he's a computer programmer by trade. But he has to find another job because the royalties on that are kind of drying up a little bit. They were living very well, and they kind of spent all their money as it was coming in. So he gets a job at a startup company, a computer company called 8-Bit. He's technically hired as a manual or technical writer, but his real job, the owner tells him, is to proofread code done by his supervisor, Dickie. Stepp has a problem with this. He's a devout Mormon, and he sees this as kind of like a dishonest, shady thing. But he just kind of mentioned in passing. He does it anyway, so it doesn't matter. We're also introduced here to Roland McIntyre, who goes by the name Saladin Gallowglass. Apparently, some sort of D&D reference. He plays D&D, maybe. I don't know. Excuse me. He's super friendly, young. He's described as being, looks like he's in high school still. Pretty cocky. And he's really creepy, like insistent that he can babysit kids and he would do it for free and he'd happily help him out. Like, pushy about it. So, like, it got pretty creepy. Then there's Deanne. Deanne's the mom, the matriarch of the family. Also a devout Mormon. I'm going to keep bringing this up because Mormonism is a theme through the whole book. She seems to just sort of either argue or support Stepp, depending on what really the story needs or what the author felt would be more compelling at that moment. And also kind of as a vehicle to introduce other characters in because Stepp's too busy doing other things. The first character that's introduced via her is a guy named Bappy, short for Baptize. We'll talk about the nicknames later. He's an old man. He's the landlord of the father of the landlord. And he lived in that house before his son rented out to the nice Fletcher family. He offers to do like the maintenance for free. Deanne's initially a little off-put because she left the door open and went around to the side yard, and when she came back, he was in the house and just kind of making himself at home. It was, but she finally agrees. She just decides he's a harmless old man and says sure, she'll give him a call. He gets her number and all that. Deanne also introduces us to the Coopers. They're another Mormon family that lives around the corner from them. They play a fairly minor role, but they're in the story, so I'm just going to mention them here. Next we have Stevie Fletcher. He's the oldest of the children. He's 7 years old. He's the only child in the family old enough to go to school. His first day of school, when he gets freshly enrolled, goes really badly. Basically, he can't understand the North Carolina accents. He ends up spending his entire first day in the principal's office. He's doing initial testing to find out where he's going to get placed after he leaves his classroom because, like I said, he can't understand the North Carolina accents. The tests basically show that he's very smart, like on a gifted level even. The principal's very happy about that. His teacher, Mrs. Jones, for some reason is offended by that. And she kind of singles him out for ill treatment. Bullies him, lowers his grades, nitpicks everything, kind of takes awards that he's earned. On top of that, she also convinces the rest of the class to sort of ostracize him or actively bully him. In response to that, he kind of becomes withdrawn and starts playing with imaginary friends, and he keeps adding more and more imaginary friends to his list. And his parents start to get really worried about that. They think 7 years old is too old to have imaginary friends, especially when he starts neglecting his brother and sister in his playtime. Now, Step, the dad, does eventually confront the teacher, secretly records her confessing to doing all this kind of really bad behavior towards this one student, and then shows her that he's recording, and she basically quits her job after that. And it's not the end of her in the story, but it's kind of the end of her point in the story. So whatever that point might have been to start with. Alright, so at this point, Step is working long hours. Deanne's being, frustrated with the life. And, to be frank, frustrating for the story reader. And she's worried, obviously, about Stevie. And they both, but for some reason, they take this opportunity to start both taking on more responsibility at the church. This leads Step to doing its home teaching, which I guess is a Mormon thing, where him and another church member go to other Mormons' houses that can't attend church and bring church to them. And he goes with another member of the church named Lee Weeks. And Deanne kind of manipulates that entire situation. She wants to get mental help for Stevie, their son. And she finds out that Lee Weeks is a member of the church, and his mom is a psychiatrist who's not a member of the church, but she thinks that connection will help Step kind of accept her as the psychiatrist. So she just kind of manipulates that whole situation, makes some phone calls, brings them in. He kind of figures it out, gets pissed off, but he does it anyway. Now, Lee is a very unbalanced individual. His mom seems to be aware of it. He believes that God is literally in him, and that with enough work and dedication, he will actually literally become God. He also fixates on Step as some sort of messiah or father figure, believing that Step has way more power than he actually has. To the point that he actually tries to intervene in the baptism of Stevie by trying to do it himself, even though apparently, at least according to this book, that's something that in the Mormon faith that the father would do with the son. He was pretty upset when it didn't happen. He eventually starts making harassing phone calls, showing up naked at the house. He thinks if he's wearing clothes, people could see him, but if he's naked, he's invisible. Kind of presents the youngest son like that. Obviously, that's not well received. Step kind of tricks him into hanging around until the police show up, arrest him. Still not the end of him. Later on, he makes a phone call from the institution he's locked in, blaming Step for the downing of an aircraft in the water over Russia, where it crashes in the water, and he says Step's just trying to baptize more people by putting them in the water. It's really almost funny, but disturbing, so... Alright. Now, during this time, Stevie has started seeing Lee's mom for therapy, and after a few weeks or months, whatever it might be, Step decides he's going to check in to see how the therapy's going. And he gets pretty upset that she's partially blaming their really devout religious beliefs on Stevie having the imaginary friends. So him and Deanne decide to kind of withdraw him from the therapy sessions. It's a theme that's going to go on through this whole thing. There's also a woman in the church. She's actually a Mormon named Dolores LeSueur, something LeSueur. And she claims to receive, like, divine inspiration from God. So everything she says is just, like, from God. She butts heads with Deanne pretty frequently. She initially tries to emotionally manipulate Stevie away from his family because Deanne upset her with one of her group talks to the girls there at the church. It seems like nobody really likes her. And then later on, like almost at the end of the book, Deanne finally confronts her during a Christmas service and kind of tricks her into making herself look very foolish in front of the entire congregation. Also, something that I'm going to get to later after the synopsis is done is her husband's name is Jacob, definitely not Cubby. Okay? Alright. So now, throughout this entire story, it's very infrequently mentioned that boys are coming up missing in the town of Steuben. It just kind of pops up randomly, and nobody's really making a big deal out of it, so it's something that's mentioned frequently enough that you notice, but it seems like they would bring it up more if it was part of the story, even though it is. And then it's finally revealed that Stevie's imaginary friends, all of them, share the names and nicknames of these missing kids. They notify the police, and a detective shows up and interviews Stevie. And this detective comes to the conclusion that Stevie's being honest, and he's a really good kid and sweet, despite there being no other evidence besides his imaginary friends share the names, and there's no follow-up whatsoever. Step and Deanne come to the conclusion that Stevie is just so pure and good, and, you know, so Mormon, I guess, that he can just feel terrible things happening in the universe. So that's kind of where they settled on that. Anyway, this is like right around Christmas at this point. Bappy comes over to put up the Christmas lights. And he hangs around a little longer than necessary, and Step and Deanne notice afterwards that Stevie's acting a little strange, like withdrawn, he's not eating, he's not really hanging out with anybody anymore. But on Christmas Eve, they, kind of force him to interact with the family. Well, Stevie says fine, and he brings all of his imaginary friends to dinner. By bringing them all, suddenly ghosts. Literally, this story had nothing to do with ghosts, and now Stevie brings 7 ghosts into the house. Everybody can see them. They're literally the kids that have been missing. Except for they're not missing, they're dead. Here's where the spoiler comes in. Bappy killed them all. He used to be a child molester. Everybody told on him, so he got upset, and now he just kills kids. Stevie's dead too at this point. He killed Stevie when he was hanging out at the house longer than he was supposed to, and everybody's buried underneath the house. It gets, like I said, this is like a really weird turn in the story. It was an interesting story before this, and now it just turned into something completely different. They contact the police detective who came over, and when he comes over, he obviously sees the ghosts, and his reaction's a little different than you would expect, in the sense that he just calls the other parents so they can come over, say goodbye, all these kids have their nice, happy Christmas Eve, and then pass on to wherever dead kids go once they're dead. And Stevie says goodbye, and that's more or less the end. There's some stuff that wraps up their whole family dynamic, but that's it. Now, my impression is, overall, I didn't care for the story. This was like, it looked like Orson Scott Card was basically, he didn't tell a bad story. It's very good writing. The pacing's a little slow for me sometimes, and a little hopscotch, if you catch my drift. It jumps around more than I like. There was a lot going on. If it sounded like all these little plot points and weird things going on were a little disconnected, that's because they were. It seemed like he had several stories that he wanted to tell and just lumped them all into another story that he was already telling. Some themes I picked up, aside from the obvious religious ones, this was I think he was given an insight. I have no reason to doubt there was an accurate insight into how Mormons live their lives. One thing I just want to touch on is nicknames. Orson Scott Card has a thing for nicknames in a lot of his books. Ender's Game, Xenocide, Children of the Mind was another one. Nicknames are kind of randomly thrown in. They seem exceptionally heavy in this book. So, Step, his real name's Stephen, but they just took the first 4 letters and made it his name, S-T-E-P. Also, he goes by Junkman, some obscure musical reference I don't understand. His wife, Deanne, is Fish Lady, same musical reference that I don't understand, but weirdly, she's also the only adult female that has a nickname. The only other female in this entire book that has a nickname is Elizabeth, which is Betsy, their daughter. Stevie, that might be a nickname. They call him Stevedore or Doorman. And then Robbie, which also might be a nickname, is the youngest son, goes by Robot or Roadbug sometimes. One of the Mormon family members, the Coopers, that we talked about earlier, the husband's nickname is Spike. I don't recall his given name. I might have mentioned that Deanne was pregnant. I might not have, because it really played nothing. It adds nothing at all to this story. But she does give birth by the end of the book, and the baby's name is Jeremy, but his nickname is Zap. And we already talked about Bappy, whose given name is Baptize. The husband, Jacob, I told you we'd get back to this. This is one of those games, like, he was called Jacob in the book. All the characters referred to as Jacob, but as an aside, Orson Scott Card decided to tell us, as an aside to the reader only, nobody in the book, that he wasn't allowed to be called Cubby. Apparently that's a nickname for Jacob in the Mormon world, maybe, or just Orson Scott Card's world. One of the missing kids' names was Alexander, who went by Sandy. Another missing kid's name was Jonathan, but he went by Jack. That's kind of a reach, if you ask me. And then Scotty and Roddy were a couple other missing boys. Those are, they barely count as nicknames. Scott and Rod were their names. Scotty, Roddy, whatever. His supervisor's name was Dickie. That was actually his given name, but it should be a nickname. This is another really weird one. One of the other employees at 8-Bit was named Bob, which might be a nickname or his given name, but this is another one where nobody actually calls him anything besides Bob in the story, except for Orson Scott Card told us, the reader, that his nickname could have possibly been Cowboy Bob because he looked kind of like a cowboy, and that's how he's referred to afterwards, only to us, not by any of the characters in the book. All right, then there's Roland McIntyre, a.k.a. Bubba. He mentions that his mom called him Bubba McIntyre, and then he goes by Saladin Gallowglass. Basically, every major character in this book has a nickname as long as they're a male. And then, of course, the mother. Now, another theme that I'm really confused about was just like this theme of persecution. I don't know if this is an Orson Scott Card thing or a Mormon thing or some combination of it, but with the exception of two main characters that play a prominent role, there's a doctor that helps give birth to the baby, and the detective that we talked about. Every other character introduced who's not a Mormon is actively oppressive to the family. So the first interaction they have is with the highway patrol officer, who is just out of the blue hostile while they pull over to clean up a mess in the car. Dickie, obviously, is just... It might not be obvious, I didn't mention it. Dickie is very hostile towards Step through his entire employment for, no reason. Ray, the owner of 8-Bit, is just kind of aloof and standoffish and looking for a reason to like come down on Step specifically, not even other employees. Mrs. Jones, the teacher, is like evilly oppressive to the son, to Stevie. Like bad. Even the secretary at the school it comes in is like just really terrible to everybody. Alright. So like I said, my take on this is he seemed to have a lot of good ideas that could have panned out into a very different stories. It seemed like he decided at the very end that this was going to be a horror story with ghosts. And until then, it was just like kind of this meandering tale with a lot of stuff going on. And then also his whole conflict with like the Mormon beliefs. They bring it up a lot. They make it seem like he's super devout and he's got all these things going on. But it turns out like he's a dick to the teacher. Then the teacher turns into a stalker. Then he's got the issue with working behind Dickie's back, despite his own objections, but he keeps doing that. But he also wants to get a contract with somebody else, but he realizes like that would be dishonest, but he still kind of manipulates them into doing that so that he can clear his own conscience, despite the fact that he's still being even more dishonest. He took like 2 extra steps of being dishonest just to make something happen, to make himself feel better. He just manipulates 8-Bit into making it possible for him to screw over 8-Bit with one of their major competitors. And then he refuses to quit without giving 2 weeks notice because that would just leave them in a lurch, despite the fact that he's definitely screwing them over on another project. And then he manipulates him into firing him the same day that he puts his nose in. So, yeah. Overall, it's kind of a confusing story. I didn't care for it too much. It was interesting. It was well written. Don't get me wrong. He can tell a story well. I just think he was trying to tell too many stories in this book. He should have just stayed focused on one main event. And, nothing against Mormons. I don't know anything about them, but maybe drop that aspect because that seemed like a distraction to everything else. So anyway, I'm going to try to do about maybe 1 or 2 of these a month. My actual real job is considered essential during this particular time, so I don't have infinite time. Plus, I like to spend time with my family and all that. If you're wondering what's in the mug tonight, it's natural ice. It's not the best beer ever made, but it is a little over $1 for 25 ounces. So, a $5 bill keeps me going for a night. If anybody actually manages to see this video, let me know. Any feedback is great. Thanks. Have a great